Welcome to the Holy Moly Bible Podcast. I'm your host. Every week, we open one contradiction the Bible holds inside of itself. 2 verses side by side. These are the things your pastor skipped past. We put it in the light, where it belongs. Did your church ever tell you that the Bible describing salvation as free will also says salvation was predetermined by God alone, without your say in the matter? Today, we're looking at 2 Bible verses that disagree on whether salvation is predetermined or the result of free will. First up, let's turn to Romans 8, verse 30. It says, "And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified." Now, let's turn to John chapter 1, verse 12. It says, "Yet all those who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." When I was a Pentecostal believer, I used to treasure the concept of predestination. Jeremiah 1, verse 5 was a verse I loved because it basically said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as prophet to the nations." For 10 years as a believer, I used to love that because it felt like a sacred bond between myself and God had been formed. For he had established in such a way where he knew me in the most intimate way possible as someone who had designed a life path with me in mind. This verse felt like the epitome of paternal care. It also meant that my life had a purpose and that everything was going to work out because it was preordained to largely work out in my favor from an all-knowing, all-powerful God. My views on this verse has since changed as I started reading between the lines and reading the Bible backwards and forwards, like the eager Christian theology student I once was. This verse, at the same time, opened the possibility that God's will is more important than human will. Of course, this might be Captain Obvious when you look at the grand scheme of what's inside the entire Bible. The Bible is basically God telling people how to live their life in order to be in accordance with his wants, needs, preferences, in order to earn salvation. It doesn't matter if you're looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament. Over and over, the writers of the Bible are communicating one thing consistently. God's will matters more than human will. When humans disobey God's will, there are punishments. If we take this one step further, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5 says, "He predestines who accept salvation." Ephesians says, "He predestined us for adoption through sonship, through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will." God is always described as omniscient, omnipotent, a perfect being. His ways are superior to our ways. He understands the universe, the past, the present, the future. He's infallible. He's always right. Human will cannot triumph over divine will because the scripture certainly wouldn't allow for it. The Bible makes the hierarchy clear. God comes first, people come second. For most of the human population that has ever existed, salvation was determined before the womb, before the age of reason, before any human will entered the question. Now let's flip over to John 1, verse 12. "Yet all those who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." This verse feels pretty straightforward. No theology degree required. If you believe, you're a child of God, which makes you eligible for heaven. It echoes back choice because believing is a choice. Faith is believing without evidence, facts, or seeing it with your own eyes. This verse makes salvation seem like it honors free will and choice. The choice to believe is left to the individual. At the heart of this current contradiction, we're looking at, do humans have free will when it comes to salvation, or do they not have free will? Let's go to Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 through 5. In essence, it says, God chooses believers before the foundation of the world, predestining them for adoption. This verse reinforces the idea that God determines who earns salvation. Let that sink in. It's the equivalent of saying that before the story of Adam and Eve, before the world itself was created across 7 days, God had more or less predetermined which individuals would earn salvation and which individuals would not. If God chooses which believers will exist before the foundation of the world, that means a long, long time ago, before Christianity was even a thing, more than 2,000 years ago, before you were born. If anything, it would suggest that even before being formed in the womb, your salvation was decided by God, because salvation was predetermined before the world was even made. If you are today years old finding out that the Bible disagrees around whether or not salvation is determined by God or determined by free will, welcome to the club. I know I had no idea myself just how far back this contradiction lived inside of the Bible and throughout church history. If you look across the United States, there are more than 355,000 churches. Many of them fall into one of two categories: Calvinism and Arminianism. Calvinism built an entire theological system off of the predestination verses. Arminianism built an entire competing system on the free will verses. Both traditions had the same Bible, the same God, and arrive at completely irreconcilable conclusions about whether human choice has any actual weight in salvation. John Calvin and Jacob Arminius were not some random extremists or fringe figures. This disagreement amongst them created countless denominations, wars, and centuries of theological argument that to this day remain unresolved. The history of the Calvinist-Arminian debate begins in the early 17th century in the Netherlands with a Christian theological dispute between the followers of John Calvin and Jacobus Arminius, and continues today among some Protestants, particularly evangelicals. The debate centers around the study of salvation and includes disputes around total depravity, predestination, and atonement. While the debate was given its Calvinist Arminian form in the 17th century, issues central to this debate have been discussed in Christianity in some form since Augustine of Hippo's disputes with the Pelagians in the 5th century. The church did not quietly manage this contradiction. It was held out in public. It split the church repeatedly. The Christian church to this day remains fractured across 45,000 denominations, each saying their way of interpreting the Bible is the right way, the one true way to get to heaven by extension. A nation celebrating independence on the premise that humans can choose their own governance, founded by men whose philosophical influences were more Locke and Voltaire than Paul and Calvin, holding a Bible that contains verses saying the outcome was decided before the womb, produces a contradiction worth spending an episode inside. Freedom as the founding myth. Predestination as the theological undermining of every choice the myth requires. Since the Bible establishes God's will is primary, human will is secondary, it's the divine equivalent of God saying jump and humans saying how high. Predestination runs on puppet's logic. God holds every string. Humans move around the eternal stage as puppets, where winning or losing was a fixed outcome before the performance started. Predestination is like a rigged fight between good and evil, because the outcome is known by the judge, who knows in advance who will win and who will lose. Imagine you're excited to go to the best restaurant in town. You see that they have a reservation system, so you make a reservation, and then the day of your reservation, you arrive and the hostess tells you the reservation system doesn't determine who actually gets the table. It's actually on a first-come, first-served basis. The outcome was not known despite having used their reservation system. The free will versus predetermination of salvation is like booking a restaurant reservation. You figure out which new restaurant you want to try. You use their app to make an online reservation. Then, the day of the event, you arrive on time, have your name confirmed. Everything looks great in the app. Then the hostess leans in and explains, the booking system exists for show. It's the owner who actually assigns each table personally on a first-come, first-served basis. And they decided before the reservation system ever went live. Your confirmed table sat second to the owner's decision that the owner made long before you made that online reservation. The way churches preach about free will as critical to salvation lands a lot like the Oprah meme. You get salvation. You get salvation. Everybody gets salvation. Only to find out later there are terms and conditions that apply that most people never read, so you don't actually get salvation. Most believers don't read the fine print. Free will versus predetermination is like getting into a VIP event. You may want salvation, but at the end of the day, it's God's choice. And He is the club owner who tells the bouncer whose name is on the VIP list to enter through the pearly gates. If a realtor in 2026 told you that a house on the market already had a predetermined owner, it would have you questioning fairness, sanity, and the entire transaction. When Bible verses say that a huge chunk of humanity has already been predetermined the outcome of going to hell, it gets filed under divine will. The Bible has multiple verses that make it possible for this contradiction to exist. The church is divided on whether salvation is determined before you're born or when you expressed interest in salvation. A holy book that cannot agree just shows you that human writers are making it up as they go. They remix the parts they like and edit the parts they don't like. The remix isn't the answer. It's to look at the book and say, it's too messed up to ever be the best, final, ultimate truth that can stand the test of time. Here's a recap of what we've covered today. The Bible disagrees on whether salvation is predetermined by God or determined by humans. Romans 8, verse 16 says, "So then it's not of him who willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy." Flip that over to Joshua 24, verse 15. We have, "Choose for yourself this day whom you serve." Today, we looked at two Bible verses that differ on whether salvation is predetermined or free will. Romans 8, verse 30 ran the sequence: predetermined, called, justified, glorified, with God as the subject in every verb. John 1, verse 12 ran the other sequence: receive, believe, become, the human act placed first, the outcome tied to it. Both verses are in the New Testament. Both claim to be divine will. Both claim the mechanism of salvation. Today's episode sat in that conflict because the Bible itself doesn't resolve the contradiction. The Christian church is divided over whether or not salvation is controlled 100% by God or influenced by human choice. Different denominations pull in different directions. In the end, the very book that lays out God's will around salvation doesn't agree clearly. When you examine the doctrine, the dogma, the denomination, and the divine word, you see human fingerprints over all of it. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. The knowledge you've gained today lives within you. No one can take it away. The world needs people honest enough to trace harm back to its source. Not to a God, but to the humans who wrote the Bible, enforced the Bible, and benefited from everyone else following it. The world needs people healing enough to name what religion costs them before it costs them everything. The world needs people human enough to know that dignity, goodness, and ethical life were never the property of any institution. They belong to us. And the world needs people heretical enough to keep asking questions the church never wanted answered. The Bible said it best, and we mean that literally. The truth will set you free. If today's episode made you think, you're exactly who this show was made for. For show notes, episode meme, and everything Holy Moly Bible related, it lives at holysmoke.wtf. New episodes of the Holy Moly Bible drop every Sunday. Subscribe wherever you listen so it lands automatically on your feed. With that, we'll see you next Sunday.